You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today, here on the Land of Israel Network, on the landofisrael.com, where I am excited to have on my show a very special guest who is one of the most impressive fellow graduates of the Ida Crown Jewish Academy in Chicago, and has risen to be the director of the General International Law Department of the Foreign Ministry of Israel, which makes her one of the top experts on international law in Israel, working for the State of Israel and helping Israel with all the complex issues it's working through right now. Her name is Sarah Weiss Ma'udi, and she has degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and from Harvard, and she has taught international law at the Ono Academic College in Israel, and she worked at the Israeli Ministry of Justice's International Treaties and Litigation Department, and right now she works for the Foreign Ministry here in Jerusalem, but she's about to become the head of everything legal for Israel at the United Nations, one of the most difficult places for Israel around the world, and she will be the one doing the fighting for us. So a real soldier for Israel. Sarah Weiss Ma'udi, thank you for coming here on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network.
Thank you, Gil, for that warm introduction. A little bit embarrassing. I want to say to the listeners out there, if you enjoy listening to Gil, I want to take a little bit of credit for him because I was actually his newspaper editor in high school. And so it's really a pleasure, Gil, for you to reach out to me, and thank you for asking me to be interviewed.
I owe it all to you, Sarah. What does it mean to be the director of the General International Law Department? What do you do on a daily basis?
Okay. Well, we do quite a lot, and we're kind of understaffed. Basically, the Office of the Legal Advisor at the Foreign Ministry is divided into three different departments. One department handles all of our treaties, our treaty negotiations from start to finish, so the negotiation phase, the assimilation in Israeli law, ratification, etc. The other department deals with both very complex diplomatic and consular issues, so immunities issues, and there also are in-house counsel, and it's very complicated in the foreign ministry because you have employees that are inside the country, outside the country, properties throughout the world. And then there's my department, which is what usually people think about when they think about a lawyer working for the foreign ministry. And we basically handle the legal analysis of all political issues that have an international bent. So just to give you sort of to throw out, at least in headlines, what we do, we cover everything from human rights. That means we're both involved in the day-to-day answering questions about different incidents and also reporting. Israel belongs to all the major human rights treaties and needs to report on a periodic basis. We just did this year, every 4 years. I'm really proud of it. Israel reports on its overall human rights record, and my department was the lead in preparing that report and going and presenting it in Geneva. We handle all issues related to international humanitarian law, the laws of armed conflict. We handle issues relating to illegal immigration issues, all that goes on in the headlines with that subject. Counterterrorism is another issue we handle. The Iran agreement is another issue we handle. Shared natural resources with our neighbors, so water, energy are issues that we handle. Border issues, land and sea border issues. European Union law and our relations with the Europeans. Environmental law, so I have a lawyer who goes to Paris and to Bonn to negotiate the Paris Agreement and other environmental agreements, all the fun stuff, and of course everything related to both our two peace treaties with Jordan and Egypt. That means the implementation and interpretation of those two treaties, and of course the peace process or the political process with our Palestinian neighbors, including the interpretation and implementation of the interim agreement that we signed with them in 1995. So I hope you guys didn't get tired from all that. I'll let you guess how many staffers we have. We're very understaffed, but it keeps us on our toes, it keeps us busy, and it's certainly every day is different and every day is a challenge, and it's the perk of the job and it's the downside of the job as well.
It's certainly a lot on your plate, and hope you have an easier time at the UN.
Well, I mean, we're actually the headquarters of the legal advisor. We provide support for the legal advisor who sits at the UN. The legal department, the foreign ministry, we have three legal advisors abroad, one that sits in The Hague, one that sits in Geneva, and then one that sits at UN headquarters in New York. And that person in New York covers both sort of the day-to-day legal issues that come up. The UN is divided into different committees. The sixth committee is the legal committee, and they handle sort of more dry academic issues that deal with the development of international law, and certainly Israel. Every year we contribute to that. There are different studies that come out, and we try to weigh in on how we view international law and sort of cutting-edge issues. And then there's obviously, as Israel, it becomes the most exciting job because as Israel, again, never a dull moment, and all issues that come up in the Israeli context, be it vis-a-vis Lebanon, vis-a-vis Iran, issues that come up in the Middle East, different decisions that are adopted against Israel. And obviously, again, like I do here at headquarters, the legal advisor there weighs in on the legal aspects of all these different political decisions.
Got it. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. Gaza, the rockets are falling on Gaza right now as we speak. And we had to endure challenges when you had the fence rushing organized by Hamas during the American embassy ceremony. What were our legal arguments at the time, and what could we do legally to make sure that the world realizes that everything Israel does there in responding is legal?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, I think as a lawyer, it's important to get the facts right. I think this is sometimes often missed in terms of, we start talking about legal concepts, but actually without talking about what's actually going on. So I think our starting point is really what was going on with those protests. And certainly, Hamas and other terrorist groups try to paint the protests as peaceful protests, as nonviolent protests against Israel, against the United States move. But this is nothing of that sort. Here we're talking about highly violent protests that include many, even by Hamas's own admission, many of the participants are Hamas terrorists themselves, many armed with lethal weaponry or, crude but lethal weaponry, grenades, hand grenades, Molotov cocktails, rocks, burning kites. And then thrown into the mix, obviously you have, and this is sort of the MO of a lot of terrorist groups, they would use civilians, women, children, the elderly, and really put them inside the violent, inside the violent areas as a sort of human shields, which is actually a major crime under international law. And very irresponsibly put them in areas where you're having these violent uprisings. So in terms of what's going on, that's what's going on now. Again, all these people, as you noted, are trying to rush the fence and enter into Israel and attack Israel. As you know, for over a decade, we've faced violent attacks by Hamas and other terrorist organizations. And this morning, we continue to be faced with those kind of attacks from, I think, at least on the radio, what I heard just now was it's assessed to the Islamic Jihad, an Iranian-backed group. But we're facing really, imminent threats of attack tunnels that feed right into Israeli kibbutzim adjacent to the Gaza Strip, but certainly in Israel proper. Rocket attacks on our cities. I heard one of the rocket attacks this morning fell into the courtyard of a nursery school. And of course, any country is going to take steps to defend itself. Now, always when we operate, be it in a military operation or in this context, and this context is an interesting legal construct. It's actually, we're talking about law enforcement, but in the context of an ongoing armed conflict with Hamas, again, over a decade of dealing with daily rocket mortar fire. And there are clear standard operating procedures, SOPs, that are given to the IDF troops about how to react and prevent the threats of these violent rioters against Israel. Among this, I think one of the things, the way that things are looked at it, is looking at the threat, and then this was actually the subject of a Supreme Court case that upheld the legality of the IDF actions, looking at the threat posed by the mass, by the throngs of people, and really, oftentimes looking at who are the main instigators within that group. And then there would be also standing operating procedures of how to deal with those people, trying to use minimum force, but also to just, again, defend Israel's borders and defend Israel's citizens.
So each soldier, each sniper, before they decided to fire, knew what they could and could not do legally.
So I think you have to look at the various phases. I mean, first of all, in the IDF, all officers go through training in terms of rules of international law and receive full training. We actually published a report after the 2014 Gaza operation that goes into, in great detail, what kind of training they receive, and then that's before you even get there, because we don't want people making decisions, in real time. And you have to know that always, if we're dealing with the loss of armed conflict, we're not dealing with the in the shoes of the reasonable legal advisor or the reasonable judge. It's always, the test is the shoes of the reasonable commander, what he or she, given the information, they have in their hands, did they undertake something that was legal in the view of a reasonable military commander. So that's how the IDF troops prepare. But then you also have the aftermath and the flip side of, what happens afterwards.
Yeah, we're going to be put on trial around the world because we responded.
Well, I mean, so that's the thing. Even around the world, even countries that have laws that you can bring lawsuits against Israel, first and foremost, the country that's the natural forum state, which would be Israel, is supposed to, when there are serious allegations of wrongdoing, investigate. And Israel is fully committed to investigating serious allegations of wrongdoing. Now, Israel has actually gone through in recent years a great deal of reform, both internal and sort of with an international aspect, because we had a public committee that reviewed all of Israel's investigation mechanisms, and this included actually a number of foreign experts who are world-renowned experts in international humanitarian law, and really looking to see if Israel's investigation mechanisms in these contexts, do they meet the test of international law? And actually the report that was produced by this committee is very comprehensive, it's hundreds of pages. But I think for the international listener, if you want to take a look, I think the most interesting chapter is the chapter of comparative law, looking at other countries' systems and seeing how Israel stands up. And I'll be a little bit of the cliff notes for that, but basically the conclusion was that Israel's investigatory mechanisms do meet international standards. And there were a number of recommendations that were made in this context that were actually adopted by the government and have already been implemented or are in the process of being implemented. And one of these that was actually implemented even before the recommendations were adopted was that Israel actually introduced already in the 2014 operation an extra layer of review, and established a fact-finding committee of senior officers who are not involved in the chain of command. That means they're not both combatants, they're not giving advice on any attack. And actually, when there is an allegation of wrongdoing, they will actually go in real time, in the midst of an operation or hostilities. And this is very unique. Most countries wait until after hostilities have ended, and they'll already start fact-finding and making recommendations. And the recommendations are used for two purposes. One is to make sure that if something was done improperly or could be done better, that there'll be lessons learned right away by the military and on the operational point of view. But then on my side, on the legal point of view, they already start making recommendations for the military advocate general, whether he should open up a criminal investigation. And their initial findings, as it's called the FFM mechanism, their initial findings are actually forwarded to the military advocate general, the MAG, who then decides whether or not to open up a criminal investigation if there's enough evidence, very much like a prosecutor or an attorney general. Or he can also send it back to them and ask them for more information. Now, that's all on the military side. And then sometimes people ask, well, can a military investigate itself? But actually, Israel's investigations don't end there, and there are multi-layers of review. The military advocate general's decision, let's say, not to open up a criminal investigation, can be further reviewed and challenged by the attorney general, who sits on the civilian side, our civilian attorney general. And then his decisions can also be reviewed by our Supreme Court. So you have really a multifaceted, multi-layered investigation mechanism that starts in the military with fact-finding, a unique fact-finding mechanism, but can go all the way to the civilian side, to the Attorney General and the Supreme Court. Countries and international bodies are supposed to give Israel the opportunity to do the right thing, that is to say, to investigate. And obviously, serious lawyers, serious jurists know that a proper investigation, a proper criminal investigation, be it on the domestic side or on the military side, doesn't happen overnight. I mean, you're a reporter. If you hear allegations of a murder or of abuse or rape, you would have no expectation that a court would find the person accused guilty the next day. And I will say, and although this is unfortunate, even in military operations, even in certain situations where civilians lose their lives, it doesn't necessarily mean there was any criminal wrongdoing. International humanitarian law, the laws of armed conflict, have very clear rules about how we would look at a given incident. And it's also not a scorecard approach. It's not you killed 7 people, we can kill 10. You would have to look incident by incident to see if each and every incident, if the acts undertaken meet the test of law. And this includes looking at tests if the military, first of all, was acting out of military necessity. You can't just act out of revenge. You have to tie your actions into military necessity. I mean, an easy example is if you see a rocket launcher and you want to take it out, you can obviously draw a military necessity towards, knocking out a launcher that's attacking your civilians. Another test would be a test called distinction. You need to distinguish between civilians and combatants, or civilian infrastructure, such as a school, a mosque, or a hospital. That said, the minute someone or something is being used for military purposes, it loses its protections under the laws of armed conflict. Another test you would look at is proportionality. And here again, you could have a situation where the military threat is so great that unfortunately, civilians lose their lives in the crossfire. If you can take out let's say a major, advanced weapons stockpile that's in the basement of a hospital, it's a big dilemma. Certainly you can point to military necessity. Certainly you can point to the hospital being used for military purposes and losing its safeguards. But what if you have real patients upstairs? The test of proportion.
And what if you have a situation where if they do break the border fence, that could lead to mass killings inside Israel, and so Israel targeting the people who are the terrorists who are touching the fence, perhaps it's actually saving lives, even if the numbers end up that no Israelis were killed and 60
well, certainly.
Gazans were killed.
Also, the test of self-defense, you don't have to wait until you have mass mass casualties on your side. A country acting properly obviously takes measures, and when you have a terrorist-sponsored mass, many of which are known terrorists themselves and admitted terrorists themselves, and they're armed and dangerous, you don't wait until you might win the PR tests on CNN with mass casualties. I mean, no country can wait for that point, and nor should any country should wait for that point. Of course, you do have to act. You do have to subdue the protesters within the confines of law. Of course, no country gets it right all the time, and if there is a wrongdoing, Israel is fully committing to investigating. Israel is fully committing to trying anyone, and we've seen incidents like this, although they're very controversial.
So, Sarah, based on your initial findings and the initial findings of everyone involved, what we did on that day that the embassy opened was legal,
I mean,
right?
again, I can't speak in blanket terms, and I don't want to say that each and everything, there are certain, things that are being investigated. So, and I'm not a legal advisor for the military, so I don't have inside information about each and every incident. And I don't think also it's proper to speak if there are certain incidents that are being investigated. I will say, as a rule, always Israel is committed to and abides by international law. Israel's troops abide by international law. And again, when Israel does, when a certain individual soldier does not get it right, which is the exception, not the rule, Israel is also committed to taking care of that, and that's also our obligation under international law.
Is there going to be some kind of probe with initial results already released soon? They did that 3 weeks after the operation in 2014. That was more complicated.
I mean, again, I can't speak to, when the results are going to be, and I don't know how. Again, I'm not involved personally on any sort of the investigation. It would be improper for me to intervene at this point. Certainly, when we have findings, those are usually published, although, sometimes certain information certainly is classified and you can't share all the information, all the details with the public. But I can't really speak for, again, I think it's and I also think, a lot of times there's this expectation of sort of instant gratification of, did they get it right? Did they get it wrong? And criminal law, criminal law doesn't work that way. It's frustrating because I think, as a journalist in the world of instant media, we're very used to sort of having an instant opinion on what's happening. This was illegal, and this was, this was legal, and this was not legal. And the world of law is more boring. It's slower paced. And so, I always, when I talk to groups, I oftentimes use an example of real examples of me sitting in the Situation Room and getting calls from a reporter like you, from CNN, from New York Times, asking me about a certain incident, and they show me pictures, and they want to put me, on a screen, a split screen with those pictures. And yet the legal answer to what happened and was it legal or illegal might not be known for several months. And they might not be known for several months actually because we were doing it right as lawyers. But obviously I lost the interview when there's a picture of a school that was attacked, but I don't have the information at the real time that school was being used for combat purposes or that school was being used to stockpile weapons. And so that makes it...
I was in that split screen during the ceremony in Jerusalem, and it was complicated, and I had to think on my feet, and certainly not have the legal background and the information that could have been helpful to me. I wish I did.
I mean, that's true. I also think, but I think that it's not always a satisfying answer to just say we're committed to investigating if any wrongdoing happened. People want to know about a particular incident. People look at imagery. Look at that case. There was one case of an infant that lost their lives in the protest. It turns out after the fact, after the imagery that went through the media and really, as a mother, you see something like that. And, of course, you have questions. Why would people bring their infant to the front of violent protests? But we'll put that aside for a second. And then it comes out that infant had congenital heart disease to begin with. Well, you have that information. That information came out relatively quickly. And even then, Israel, and these were headlines in the New York Times, lost the PR battle with that one. Think about even more so when you're talking about, legal proceedings that might happen months afterwards.
So if you don't mind, I want to change the subject to settlements in general. We're not immediately having to deal with it. You have more time to prepare, I guess. There was a conference this week in Jerusalem calling for applying Israeli sovereignty to the Jewish communities that are in Area C of the areas that Israel maintains full control of according to the Oslo process in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. Can we do that legally under international law? Are we fine with settling these places and later on applying Israeli law to them?
I want to be careful. Just to be clear, I'm a legal advisor. I'm not a politician. I'm not a policymaker as well. We hear lots of different rumors and different proposals that sort of float in the air. I really wouldn't want to speak towards this, that, or the other proposal. My job is to I
from
mean,
a
my
legal
job from behind the.
perspective. Politically, I know what they should do or not do, but
Well,
legally, can we get away with it?
as a lawyer, I work a little bit more on these issues behind the scenes, and I would have to. I really wouldn't want to speak in blanket terms. I would have to look at a specific proposal, and sort of comment on the legality of that. Clearly, I mean, international lawyers who are in the system, their job is to flag issues that could be raised under international law. And we've even had statements by our most senior legal advisors on certain, initiatives of, whether or not willing to defend something or not in the Supreme Court. And this is very much based on, whether or not something complies with international law. But I will say, I have to say for this issue, I'll say that I don't really want to speak sort of in the air about an initiative. If something concrete came up, and when things come up that are concrete, we work primarily behind the scenes to give legal advice, and then.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but if we have to be specific, let's say that Netanyahu decides that he wants to apply Israeli law to Ma'ale Adumim as a starter.
Again, I really
I
don't feel so comfortable, Gil, speaking in terms of speculation about certain proposals, and we have to see how these things play out. And certainly, I'm ready, willing, and able in my capacity, and it usually not in a public capacity, but in my professional capacity at the Foreign Ministry. When we need to provide legal guidance and legal advice, that's what we're paid to do. So I think maybe we'll leave that aside for a minute. We'll see how things play out in reality, because I've heard many different proposals and different ideas, and proposals aside, sometimes what happens in real time after receiving legal advice is sometimes different than what's floated initially.
Got it. You mentioned that you were involved in issues related to the Iran deal.
I'm not involved. I was not a negotiator for the Iran deal. We work on just, we look at, as a lawyer, analyzing it and analyzing. I mean, I think a lot of people talk about the Iran deal. Not so many people actually have read the JCPOA, the Joint Action Plan, or the UN resolution that anchors it in. Part of my department's job is to sort of review and analyze. Again, we don't create Israel's policies. According to that, although Israel's policies are quite clear, and I can speak as a lawyer that the deal certainly had many flaws, and I think our Prime Minister has been very clear on what those flaws are, and I think the U.S. has been clear on what's its position since it made the decision to withdraw.
Got it. Anything else that you feel comfortable with talking about that you can tell the listeners around the world about regarding Israel and its legal battle?
Well, I think if we're sort of to finish off. A lot of times people think about Israel, they think about like the incidents we talked about in depth in Gaza. They think about, incidents related to settlements, the issue related to. And I just wanted to flag that a little bit about other things that we do on sort of in the international stage as a positive agenda. I mentioned all the topics that my department handles, but I didn't mention actually the thing that we do that I'm most proud of. And Israel, we're actually involved, like I think many people know, Israel is involved, let's say, in water or agriculture, in helping developing countries develop their technologies and their capabilities. But few people know that we're actually also involved in these kind of initiatives on the legal front. And I think I want to share with the audience a little bit about projects that we've been involved in that I think are very much core values, core Zionist values, and sort of being a light unto the nations. And a couple of projects we've been involved in, for example, and this is actually under a UN umbrella. So you started off on how difficult it is for Israel at the UN, but I want to also mention that sometimes we do have positive collaboration. So the UN a couple of years ago was looking for a country to help develop or strengthen public defenders' offices in developing countries. and not too many countries signed up for the challenge. And in Israel, actually, we have a very young public defender's office. It's about 20 years old. People who work in it are mostly my age or a bit younger. And we actually sent our Israeli public defenders to Liberia for a number of weeks, to Vietnam for a number of weeks. And Liberia was actually really building the Liberian after a gruesome civil war, of actually helping build their public defender's office. And this is a place, when you think about the core building blocks of democracy, of a legal system, of really, the right of a defendant to receive proper defense. Public defender's office, and obviously in prosecutions the state shows up against our public defenders, but they're very much part and parcel of our legal system. We're very proud of them. Went down there, actually rolled up their sleeves and trained numerous Liberian public defenders. We did the same in Vietnam. They have a public defender's office, but it's obviously less developed than ours, and sort of giving tips about how to strengthen that institution. And we do lots of projects like that all the time. And I think that's sometimes the story that isn't told. We did a project, I'm a feminist, so I have to add this in, about the influence of women in international law. We did a project a couple of years back in The Hague with 16 other countries. I think about when Israel sponsors with 16 other countries a project. And we actually we did sort of a panel from different continents, different women, key figures in developing international law, and very proud that Dorit Banish, our first Chief Justice, our first female Chief Justice, our first female state prosecutor, she represented us, and she sat actually on the stage next to the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, who's from Africa, from the Gambia. And really a moment of pride to be Israeli and sort of to give people a different perspective. For anyone who knows our Ministry of Justice, certainly, more than 50% women there in our justice system too. A lot of times I bring foreign dignitaries, even from developed countries, who are quite surprised at just how many women we have, that we have women Chief Justices. And I think that sometimes, it's certainly a big part of what I see as my job, of sort of changing views, changing stereotypes about Israel. We're not just all war and terrorism. And it's important to me when I'm abroad to make sure that we're clear on just how committed we are to law, to international law, and how much we have to contribute, and how active we are in those fields.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm glad that you're given this opportunity to help the country and make people around the world realize what Israel
thanks so much, Gil, and it's always good to chat with you and to talk with you, and I'm very proud of you too, and it's amazing to see how much you've accomplished. And that's it, and wishing the viewers a good rest of the day. The listeners. I'm used to doing television. Actually, I think this is my first radio interview ever, actually. I'm used to doing television interviews more. But wishing the listeners a good rest of the day, and thank you for your attention.
Pleasure having you, Sarah. Your radio interviews are great.
I was thinking today, what am I going to wear? And then I was like, oh wait, I don't have to blow dry my hair. Okay, this is already good. So no, this is okay. Okay, fantastic.
Exactly. Thank you for being here on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network, and listeners, thank you for being with me.
Great, thanks, Gil. Bye-bye.
In an unprecedented revelation that shocked the world, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu exposed Iran's diabolical plan to build nuclear weapons and ultimately thrust the world into nuclear war. How did Israel successfully penetrate the most protective and secretive bunker in Tehran and extract thousands of files from under the Iranian regime? And the one question nobody seems to be asking is, why does Iran want to destroy Israel in the first place? This week on Israel Inspired.
Israel Inspired with Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Sharing the